Welcome back everyone to Earth Science. Today is internationally celebrated Earth Day. This year we learned a lot about Earth, and recently we've been learning about different types of weather: stormy weather, clear skies, and severe weather, and the factors that will affect it. Today we're going to talk about climate. What's the difference between climate and weather? Well, climate is the long-term pattern of weather in an area. This is based on temperature, how hot the summers and how cold the winters are going to be, and precipitation, how much and what kind of precipitation is going to fall at different times of the year. Now, before we move on, it's important to understand that these ideas can be a little misleading. For example, China and Chile both have the same average yearly temperature. However, the range, how hot and cold it gets, is much larger, meaning it can get very hot or very cold, as opposed to Chile's range is a lot smaller. It doesn't really change that much. However, the averages is going to be the same. The same thing for precipitation. India and Alabama both have the same average yearly precipitation. However, India has all their rain in just a few months, while in Alabama, it's spread apart through the whole year. Now let's move on. So what is going to affect what controls the climate, that controls temperature and precipitation? The first thing is latitude, where you are located on the Earth. The higher you go towards the northern or southern poles, it's going to be colder. As opposed to closer to the equator, it's going to be warmer because of the sun's rays hit stronger there. Also near the equator, you're going to have more precipitation, and in the mid-latitudes than you will have at the poles. Another thing that will affect temperature and precipitation are the prevailing winds, the winds that are caused by different air masses in the Coriolis effect. The wind will affect what type of air, whether it's hot or cold, or wet or dry, and will affect the temperature and precipitation. Other things that affect temperature and precipitation will be elevation. The higher up you are, for example on a mountaintop, it's going to be colder temperature, and colder temperature means there's less water in the air, meaning less chance of precipitation. As well as topography, which is the shape of the land. Refer back to our lesson about precipitation and cloud formation, how clouds will go over a mountain range. It's going to affect the climate as well. Next we have nearby water is going to affect the temperature and precipitation. Water holds heat longer than the land does, so land that is near water is going to be regulated temperature. It's not going to be as high or low, it's going to stay somewhere in the middle. As well as the precipitation is affected by the water since there's more moisture in the air. As well as the ocean currents. We're going to learn tomorrow about different ocean currents, but for example, a warm ocean current is going to warm the coast near it, as well as bring in more moisture into that area. And finally, we have plant life. This is going to affect the temperature because plant life will affect how much insolation or sunlight is absorbed, and the plants will add water to the air through transpiration, which is when they release water into the air around them. So now that we know what affects the climate, let's talk about different climate zones. The first type of climate zone is called a polar zone, which is very cold. Now, what you see here is called an ice cap. Earlier this year, we learned about glacier erosion. These happens in a polar region called an ice cap, which is freezing all year long, not allowing any plants to grow. Eventually, this ice builds up since it's not melting and will accumulate into glaciers that will begin to move. Another type of polar region is called a tundra. This is not freezing all year round and has at least 1 month with temperature above freezing. This doesn't allow trees to grow, but other plants like grass can. The next type of climate zone is a dry climate zone. A dry climate zone can include a desert, but is really any area that loses more water through evaporation than it gains through precipitation. The next climate zone is a humid tropical zone. These areas are near the equator, which is going to increase their temperature and moisture. The next type of climate zone exists in the mid-latitudes. The mid-latitudes is the area between 30 degrees and 60 degrees, both in the northern and southern hemispheres. There are two types of climates you'll find in the mid-latitudes. The first is areas that are situated in warmer areas near the equator, and near water. This is going to allow for mild weather, mild winters, since the water is going to regulate the temperature, and being near the equator will make it warmer. As opposed to areas that are farther away from tropical and warm areas and are inland without any water around it to regulate, these areas are going to have very severe winters. The last type of climate zone is called a highland. As you can see here, we have a mountain range, but the climate on the top of the mountain and on the bottom of the mountain are going to be very different. Our climate is constantly changing and has changed over thousands of years of Earth's history. There are many things that will cause a climate change, and the effects will be felt both on a local and global level. Some of the things that might affect climate change is how close the Earth is to the Sun. If it's closer, it's going to be warmer, and if it's farther, it'll be colder. Earth might move over thousands of years and will change the temperature a couple degrees. As well as the Sun itself. If it's going to be hotter, it's going to heat Earth more, causing the climate to change as well over thousands of years. Another thing we learned about earlier this year is continental drift. Now imagine a continent is near the equator and then begins to float up towards the northern pole. This is going to change the climate since it's now moving in the latitudes, as well as the surrounding water might change it, and when continents collide, mountain building occurs, or orogenies. This will create higher elevation as well as change the shape of the land. Another thing that will affect climate is volcanic eruptions. The dust that comes out of a volcano is going to go into the atmosphere and potentially block out sunlight that's coming in, reflecting the heat back into space. Scientists have told us that in recent years humans have affected the climate as well. Through things like deforestation, we increase the amount of carbon, which is the gas that traps heat in Earth, causing Earth's climate to heat with potential risks like rising sea levels. Today is internationally celebrated Earth Day. Today, let's take a minute to think back to all the things we learned about the Earth this year and realize how much we have. That's all I need to for today. Please answer the questions in the form below. And as always, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out and send me a message on the classroom. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great day.